Now, when The Last of Us debuted in 2013, it certainly had some woke moments, but overall, it was a solid story about a man on a path to redemption.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
At his core, Joel was another version of the road warrior, who himself is a popular male archetype. Now, is it a cliche? Sure, but so is moving to a farm to raise sheep with your homosexual lover.
More? You can tell me to stop.
Snowy. Barn time.
To briefly summarize the first game's plot, in 2013, an outbreak of a mutant cordyceps fungus ravages the United States, transforming its human hosts into aggressive creatures known as the Infected. A man named Joel, living in Texas, flees the chaos with his brother Tommy and daughter Sarah. As they flee, Sarah is shot by a soldier and dies in Joel's arms. 20 years later, civilization has been decimated by the infection. Joel is now a hardened, bitter man working as a smuggler with his partner Tess in a Boston quarantine zone. Together they hunt down a black market dealer who had stolen a weapons cache from them. The dealer reveals that he traded the cache with the Fireflies, a rebel militia opposing the quarantine zone authorities. The leader of the Fireflies, Marlene, shows up and offers to hand over the cache if Tess and Joel smuggle a teenage girl named Ellie to the Massachusetts State House. Joel and Tess accept the offer and set out for the State House with the girl in tow. But after an encounter with a government patrol, they discover that Ellie is infected. Full infection normally occurs in under 2 days, but Ellie claims she was infected 3 weeks earlier and that her immunity may lead to a cure. Upon arriving at the State House, however, they discover that all the Fireflies there are dead. Tess then reveals that she's been bitten by an infected, and believing in Ellie's importance, persuades Joel to do whatever it takes to get Ellie to the Fireflies. She then sacrifices herself against pursuing soldiers so that Joel and Ellie can escape. Over the course of the following year, Ellie and Joel form an unbreakable bond that masterfully plays out via dialogue, narrative, and even game mechanics. Once in the vicinity of the Salt Lake City Hospital, where a Firefly outpost is said to be located, Ellie is rendered unconscious after almost drowning, and Joel is knocked out by Fireflies on patrol. He awakens later to be told by Marlene that Ellie is being prepped for a surgery to remove the cordyceps mutation from her brain. The procedure, he's told, could lead to a vaccine, but will kill her in the process. Joel then strongly protests, at which point Marlene orders him to be removed from the building. Joel breaks free and battles his way through the hospital. He kills the surgeon, rescues Ellie, and then escapes. On the drive out of the city, Ellie wakes up but has no idea what happened from the point where she almost drowned. Joel then claims that the Fireflies had found many other immune people, but were ultimately unable to create a cure. They then return to a settlement in Wyoming where Joel's brother lives. Ellie expresses doubt about Joel's accounting of the events and demands that he swear it's all true. He does, she says okay, and the credits roll with the sentiment that Joel had concealed the truth in order to protect her. The sequel begins about 4 years later. Ellie, who's now 19, is still living in Jackson, Wyoming. Seeking revenge, Abby, the daughter of the surgeon Joel killed, leads a group of ex-Fireflies to the town's outskirts. Upon seeing how large the town is, her companions consider turning back. Angered by this, she storms off by herself and gets into trouble. She's about to be killed by an infected when, by sheer luck, Joel and his brother stumble upon her while out on patrol. Unaware of her hostile intentions, they save her. Then, as the storm approaches, she offers the two to hold up at her nearby camp. Once there, she shoots Joel in the leg with a shotgun. Her friends apply a tourniquet, and she proceeds to beat him with a golf club. During all of this, Ellie and Dina, her bisexual Jewish girlfriend, are themselves out on patrol as the same storm approaches. They take shelter in a library, where they stumble upon a weed farm of all things. The two then decide to get high and make out. Then, during their pillow talk session, Jesse, Dina's Asian ex-boyfriend, shows up and tells them that Joel and Tommy are missing. The three split up the search. Ellie arrives at Abby's camp in time to witness Abby smash Joel's head in. Then the group decides not to kill Ellie or Joel's brother, and instead knocks them out and leaves. From here, the sequel's plot feels like a straightforward story about revenge, until the halfway point when everything switches to the perspective of Joel's killer, Abby, and uses cheap emotional tricks on you in an effort to reveal the humanity of your enemies. As the game's director, Neil Druckmann, put it, the game is, quote, a commentary about the cycle of violence. Throughout the experience, Naughty Dog repeatedly forces guilt on the player via scripted actions that, even from Ellie's perspective, had fairly clear justification. For example, when Ellie breaks into Abby's hideout, Abby's dog attacks her, and hurdy-dur-dur-dur, Ellie defends herself. The second half of the game spends no small amount of time guilting you for having done this via warm interactions with the same dog from Abby's perspective. Then, when Ellie confronts two of Abby's friends in the same building, they attack her, and hurdy-dur-dur-dur, she defends herself. But the woman who tries to stab her turns out to be pregnant, and Ellie loses her mind over it. Now, of course, any normal person would feel terrible after having killed a pregnant woman. Well, maybe not. Abby at one point is literally about to gleefully and knowingly murder a pregnant woman until her friend's protest stops her.
She's pregnant. Good. Abby.
Even putting aside the game's woke agendas, many of the new characters are simply poorly written, are unlikable, and lack any serious amount of depth, which ruin the experience since the goal was to make players feel bad for having hurt them. By the time I fought Ellie with Abby's avatar, I just wanted Ellie to kill me. It felt terrible having to fight a character whom I had far more attachment to. Earlier in the game, Abby tracks Ellie down after learning that Ellie had killed her friends. She shoots Jesse in the face, thereby killing one of the more likable characters, which made me hate her even more. Then, despite the fact that Joel had saved Abby's life, Abby cries to Ellie about the fact that she and her friends had let Ellie live after they killed Joel.
We let you both live, and you wasted it.
This line echoes what Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, had uttered to Joel in the first game, when she was forcing him to leave the facility after he questioned the morality of letting his adopted daughter die on a surgical table because some guy he never met said it would save the world.
Don't waste this gift, Joel.
The idea here is that Ellie, like Joel, should have walked away. Abby's mercy was a gift to Ellie, just as Ellie's sacrifice would have been a gift to humanity. To quote an article about the game's Jewish themes that Druckmann himself shared on social media, quote, if Ellie had taken any advice during the game, it would have been best for her to take the advice of the synagogue's rabbi, who left a letter in a desk about how he had to evacuate the synagogue at the start of the outbreak. It's sad to be forced from your home, he wrote, but in the end, it's the living people that matter. Jews throughout history have learned this. The Last of Us Part 2 might have been very different had Ellie learned it too, unquote. Curiously, Druckmann spent his childhood in the West Bank, an area of Palestinian territory that is actively being annexed by Israeli settlements. And yet, the inspiration for the theme of cyclical violence actually came from a personal trauma he suffered after he moved to the US in 1989. In an article about the game's development, journalist Sam White recounts some of his conversations with Druckmann. Quote, it was while living in the US that he also suffered a personal trauma of his own, one that would eventually become the inspiration for the game. I don't want to go into specifics about it, but I saw a video of a lynching when I was much younger, he recalls. It's a memory we discussed several times throughout my visits. It was like a news thing.
No.
And then, feeling intense hatred for the people that committed the lynching and thinking like, oh man, if I could hurt these people in some horrible ways, then I could. While fleshing out the story of Part 2 and reflecting on his childhood, on the universality of tribalism, the othering of minorities, and the justification of atrocities, he began to explore the themes of retribution, revenge, and justice. I was like, oh, we can make the player feel that, he says. We can make you experience this thirst for revenge, this thirst for retribution, and having you actually, commit the acts of finding it, and then showing you the other side to make you regret it. To make you feel dirty for everything you've done in the game, making you realize, I'm actually the villain of the story, unquote. Now, Druckmann had a great opportunity with this game to draw on his experiences as an Israeli Jew to have an honest conversation about the Jewish contribution to the Palestinian conflict, and more broadly to how Jews themselves contribute to cycles of violence, vengeance, and persecution. Instead, all you get are tropes about Jews being the eternal victims and praises for being the ultimate survivors.
Hey, Ellie. This place is a synagogue. How can you tell? One, there are menorah decorations on the wall. It's a Jewish thing. And two, I didn't burst into flames just now, so... My sister used to drag me to a synagogue all the time.
You never struck me as much of a believer.
Nah, but I like coming from a long line of survivors.
You mean after Outbreak Day?
That, and the Inquisition, and the Holocaust. My family always made it out alive. Barely. Jewish holidays are all about food. And celebrating not getting annihilated by our enemies.
A long line of survivors.
Exactly.
The same Jewish article that Druckmann shared on Twitter emphasizes that, quote, "These conversations aren't hidden away in a part of the game you can easily miss. Going through the synagogue is part of the main objective," unquote. The author then expounds upon how, like Dina, Judaism gives her a connection to her ancestors and that, quote, "No matter how many things change in the world, Judaism has endured," unquote. But in addition to being victims, the Jews have also historically committed genocide, conquest, and have held millennia-old grudges and sought vengeance numerous times against their enemies.
This is truly a promised land. Look at it. So green and fertile.
They are not marching. He says they have stopped for a special ritual they call Passover.
And what sort of ritual is that?
Since Dina mentioned food, Hamantash is a Jewish food eaten during the holiday of Purim that celebrates the killing of Haman, a historical enemy of the Jews. In Israel, the food is actually called Onsei Haman, meaning Haman's ears. The Jews are actually some of the most vengeful people on the planet, and yet despite Druckmann's theme about cyclical violence and vengeance, he never once addresses this aspect of Jewish behavior. He could easily have done so with some sort of offhanded comment from Dina, or perhaps even the inclusion of a Palestinian character. He and other developers at Naughty Dog have repeatedly stated that they believe diversity makes their stories better. In fact, they took the liberty of making Jackson, Wyoming quite ethnically diverse. Now, technically, Jackson County doesn't exist, and neither does the town in the game, but it's clearly based off of the Jackson of Teton County, Wyoming. According to the 2013 census, the year of the outbreak in the Last of Us timeline, Jackson had 9,777 inhabitants. The racial makeup was 6,655 whites, 228 Asians, 255 non-Hispanic persons of mixed race, 56 Native Americans, and 2 African Americans. The remaining 2,581 persons were Hispanic. Thus, 26% of the population was Hispanic, while 68% was white. The remaining 6% was mostly Asians and Native Americans. Moreover, most of the Hispanics were probably recent migrants, who would have fled home to their families in Mexico after the outbreak. Although the outbreak supposedly began in Central America, so maybe not. Either way, you don't see a bunch of Mexicans in Jackson. You see an absurd amount of black people. Now, what's remarkable about the game's theme of cyclical violence is that the game goes out of its way to avoid a direct depiction of ethnic conflict. Each faction has a carefully curated amount of diversity. However, this simply isn't how reality works. Just as a Middle Eastern region comprised of various ethnicities devolves into ethnic conflict once the government falls apart, the same thing would happen after a collapse in the US. Towns would not have equally distributed diversity, and women certainly wouldn't be roaming the countryside as warriors equal to men.
I actually cleared you for active duty. Barely.
And yet, a major plot point in the game is the genocide of a religious cult on a nearby island. Now again, since each faction involved has a carefully curated amount of diversity, we technically can't call this ethnic cleansing, even though that's the idea, which is why at one point Abby is portrayed as virtuous for defending a member of the island's cult. She's taking a stand against ethnic cleansing and siding with the oppressed over her own people, who are now the oppressors.
Oh my god, she's gone. Come on. Those were your fucking people. You're my people.
Surprisingly, the idea to kill all the cultists was that of a black man, Isaac. Perhaps this dovetails into why some reviewers have been disturbed by the level of violence in the game. As one person at Kotaku put it, the game's diversity, quote, felt like an equal opportunity for different kinds of people to suffer as the game went on, unquote. It's almost as if the person who wrote this felt like some groups should suffer more than others. Putting that aside though, Isaac's semi-villainous nature really had nothing to do with his racial identity, but it's still surprising that Naughty Dog had the courage to depict a black man negatively in 2020. On the other hand, Isaac is the leader of the most powerful army in the northwestern United States, which is about to ethnically cleanse an entire island of anti-LGBT, bigoted religious fanatics. The cult itself is very one-dimensional. It's an inconsistent caricature of how religions have historically attributed things like famines and environmental disasters to sin or the use of technology. The Jewish article Druckmann cited discusses this. Unsurprisingly, however, the author excludes Judaism from that sort of analysis, and praises Naughty Dog's depiction of Judaism as a grounding, calming force for Dina's character, but then points out that the game doesn't shy away from the evils of religion. The evil Seraphites, as she calls them, quote, think if they can get rid of all sin, the zombies will go away and society can go back to normal. Their belief, too, gives them a sense of purpose and control in a frightening world. There are a lot of morally gray factions in Part 2, but this isn't one of them. The Seraphites show how religion can go too far when that is all you rely on in the world, unquote. Now, there's nothing outright damning about what she says here, but it does contribute to the revelation that Druckmann was more interested in holding up Judaism and praising it in comparison to a morally corrupt strawman than he was in any sort of honest self-criticism. This seems like, dare I say, a kosher approach to tackling the themes of cyclical violence. To a certain extent, I suspect that the Seraphites are partially concealed meta-commentary on historical Judeo-Christian hostilities. The cult builds off tropes of religious conservatives being anti-science who resort to evil behavior when faced with obstacles and social change. But the framing is often confused. Lev is a transgender boy whose childhood dream to be a soldier, just like her sister, Yara, was shattered when she was promised as a wife to an elder. Against her sister's advice, she shaves her head and changes her name from Lily to Lev. In response, the cult declares both sisters apostates and continuously tries to murder them. So the cult was progressive enough to allow females to become warriors, but mindlessly bigoted enough to want to murder both of them after one of them shaved their head.
Do you regret shaving your head?
We're not supposed to have regrets.
Overall, the game conveys the idea that religions go too far. Well, except for Judaism, which is a grounding force that keeps Jews' pristine vestiges of moral certitude.
Remember next time there's kids around.
Yeah, like you're setting such a great example.
There's another interesting article on the series that Druckmann also shared on Twitter, calling it a thoughtful reflection. It articulates how the sequel deconstructs and views Joel's actions in the first game. The author writes, quote, Joel grew to love Ellie so much that, by the end of the first game, he's willing to essentially let the world burn to save her, unquote. The author highlights that, quote, Joel doomed millions of people to death, but on a more personal level, he sent Ellie and Abby on their own paths of self-destruction, tragically altering their lives forever, unquote. He goes on to call Joel's actions twisted, selfish, and unjustifiable, but notes that in Joel's mind, he was doing right by Ellie, the person he loved most. Indeed, upon finding out that he lied to her, Ellie becomes intensely angry at Joel for saving her. Although not intended as such, it really came off as a teenage temper tantrum, and, like a good father, Joel regretted nothing.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
Quote, how could he feel this way, knowing this decision cost so many lives and ultimately cost Ellie her innocence, unquote. Well, the idea that Joel's decision cost Ellie her innocence is a bit absurd. This is a girl who was almost raped and had to kill dozens of people to survive. And just so we're clear, all of those people, in theory, would have had their own sob story to tell as well.
You kill to survive. And so do we. We have to take care of our own, by any means necessary.
Now, I understand the idea here that even noble actions can have negative consequences, but it's exceedingly twisted to depict a father's unconditional love for his child as unjustifiable. The article here is marketed as being about how love conquers all, but in reality, it's about how Joel's love for Ellie caused everyone around him pain. Even the author highlights that the entire second game revolves around the fateful moment when Joel decided to save Ellie. He calls it, quote, the anchor point for the entire saga, unquote. Another review that Druckmann has also approvingly shared is one by a YouTuber named Girlfriend Reviews, and it too echoes the same basic view that maybe Joel was the villain.
Seattle Day 1 through 3 for Ellie is a progression of increasingly horrendous acts, accompanied by a story told through flashbacks that represent her increasingly horrendous mental state. These memories go from the best of times to the worst of times that she shared with Joel, climaxing with the revelation that he lied to her about what happened at the end of the previous game. Joel murdered the doctors searching for a cure, and in Ellie's own words, prevented her life from meaning something. When we learn that she has been struggling with the same morally ambiguous actions of a grief-stricken man that we as players have struggled with for so many years, we are forced to confront a grim possibility. Maybe, just maybe, Joel lived long enough to see himself become the villain, at least in someone else's story. And maybe, just maybe, in that story, he had it coming. In the present day, as a grief-stricken Ellie slowly becomes a more terrifying monster than some of the literal monsters, her friends begin to question if revenge is worth it. The player begins to question if revenge is worth it. And after her rage results in the death of a nearly born child, Ellie finally decides she's okay with letting Abby live if it means getting her loved ones back home safe.
The idea that Ellie's life ultimately had no meaning because she didn't die on a surgical table is abominable. She could get married, have her own children, begin the process of passing on her immunity to future generations. But of course, that would require her to make a sacrifice since she's a lesbian. And I suppose in the moral framework of 2020, it's far more noble to die on a surgical table than it is to suffer pregnancy and motherhood. Sure, if we take the Firefly's promise of being able to make a vaccine and save the world at face value, then from a pragmatic standpoint, yes, the right thing to do would have been to let Ellie die on that table. But the entire winter sequence of the first game was Ellie defending Joel while he was unconscious, which was purposefully mirrored in Joel's fight to save Ellie from the operating table while she was unconscious. It's also not a coincidence that Abby's story likewise mirrors Joel's. Like Joel, she lost someone close, became a hardened shell of her former self, but then found meaning again by adopting an orphaned girl. Just as the first game set up a framework to justify Joel's killing of the Fireflies to save Ellie, the sequel sets up a framework to justify Abby's saving of Lev. But whereas Joel grew a paternal attachment to Ellie over months of traveling with her across the nation, Abby guns down hordes of her own people to save some kid she's barely known for a few days. It's a flat, poor attempt to replace the meaningful relationship between Joel and Ellie. So to summarize, Joel is now the villain because after he lost his biological daughter, spent the next 20 years living in misery, reluctantly learned to be a father again to a little girl who herself had fought vigorously to keep him alive, didn't just walk away and let her die after Marlene, a woman he barely knew, claimed some doctor he hadn't even met was going to save the world. Curiously, even the aforementioned rabbi, whose note Ellie found in a desk, suggests that Joel had a responsibility to save her because she was a living person. As one of the articles Druckmann shared states, for Joel, quote, "Home is wherever Ellie is," unquote. The same author capitalizes on how the ending credits plays the wayfaring stranger and talks about how Joel and Abby have, metaphorically, crossed over the River Jordan to the Promised Land. According to the Christian faith, as he states, quote, "The Israelites crossed the River Jordan to make it to the Promised Land. It's also where Jesus was baptized, washed of sin." Joel and Abby seem to have made their way across the rapids, and perhaps Ellie has yet to make it to the other side. But at least now she's moving in the right direction, unquote. Now, what direction is that? Well, it's one without a link to Joel. It's one where she washes herself of his sin. Throughout the story, Joel's guitar serves as an emotional link between the two, but her path to vengeance gets her fingers bit off by the same girl who killed Joel. Thus, her ability to play and her link to Joel are severed. Now, this is depicted as a statement about how vengeance destroys love, which would seem to contradict the idea that the story is about how love conquers hate. But really, why write a sequel that destroys a previously celebrated relationship between a father and a daughter?
Naughty Dog's intention for making you play as two separate characters with two separate stories was to cause a complete loss of subjective self-identity when their timelines merge.
We are sowing uncertainty. We are warring on their minds.
So, we wage war on their minds. And meanwhile, I am rapidly losing my own.
Color me surprised that an Israeli, born into a colonialist settlement in the West Bank, ethnically cleansing Palestinians, moved to the country that saved his people and gave him a homeland, to teach them a lesson about how to end cyclical violence via the loss of subjective self-identity. As the author of the Jewish article Druckmann cited stated, quote, "In real life, Jews have suffered centuries of discrimination and violence," unquote. The thing is, according to Druckmann's own theme of cause and effect leading into cyclical violence, there must be a reason for this. Rather than explore the Jewish contribution, however, he ignored its existence entirely, and instead placed a white Christian man squarely at the center of a world of suffering.
I don't think I can ever forgive you for that.
In a way, the sequel's theme isn't cyclical violence. It's that a father's love for his child is selfish and leads to pain.